Right, so I'm finding I'm starting a few of my New Year's videos by saying New Year, New Start, but it's not necessarily for the best of reasons each time, especially when it applies to Israel and their new start apparently being to start war on an all-new war front. I suppose looking at this is one way to ensure there can be no ceasefire and no peace in Gaza at all, when the beef they are starting is with one of the negotiators, one of the mediators, with Egypt, amid claims by Israel that Egypt are the ones now threatening the peace accords that have stood between the two countries for the last 46 years. Never mind the small fact that Israel are literally violating those same peace accords and have been for getting on for a year now, to the point I mooted potential breakdown in relations and the resumption of conflict between the two countries quite some time ago. But now it looks closer than ever, and all Egypt have dared to do, in point of fact, is prepare to defend itself from a potential Israeli incursion. And having witnessed what Israel is currently doing in Syria, it's not hard to see why Egypt might think it prudent to do just that. Right, so there is news of absolute hell up this morning, breaking out between Israel and Egypt. And all because Egypt has been beefing up its own defences on its side of its border with Israel and Gaza. So what on earth has Benjamin Netanyahu got a problem with in which case? Well, it seems he does, as the government-affiliated Israeli news outlet Channel 14 has been quoted as saying, "Egypt violates the peace agreement and establishes military obstacles within its own territory. The Israeli security establishment has detected military activity by the Egyptian army in central Sinai, which constitutes a violation of the peace agreement with Israel. According to initial reports, Egyptian military activity in central Sinai includes logistical preparations and the construction of various obstacles in the area, potentially hindering Israeli forces' operations in the event of a future military confrontation." This was then followed up by commentary from one of Channel 14's journalists, inverted commas, Hillel Bitton, who said, "Contrary to the peace agreement with Egypt, the defence establishment identifies military activity in central Sinai, including logistical preparations and the construction of armoured obstacles in the area which, if, God forbid, a military conflict develops in the future, could harm the activities of our forces. At both the senior political and security levels, discussions are being held with the Egyptians on this matter. If Egypt are conducting military activity in their territory, the Sinai Desert, then God forbid we ever go to war with them again, because such activity might harm Israeli forces." That is literally what they're moaning about. Well, why are you going to go to war with them to begin with then? Oh yes, Netanyahu, speaking through his now presumably cancer-free rear orifice, has made the claim that this is Egypt violating the peace agreement between the two countries that has existed since 1978. And so you're now taking this as an act of aggression. Well, hold the bus here, sunshine. You want to look in the mirror for 2 minutes first and foremost. The peace deal being referred to here, of course, are the Camp David Accords. Regular viewers will have heard me discuss these before. A peace deal bringing an end to years of aggression between Egypt and Israel as they were. Arguably the greatest achievement of the now late President Jimmy Carter, who was functionally the last president working for peace in this region, and not for what the US could exploit out of it, as every president has seemed to have done ever since. Up until 1979, Egypt and Israel have gone to war with each other on 5 occasions, so for it all to fall apart now would be a 6th conflict breaking out between the two states. But bringing an end to all of that was the signing of the so-called Camp David Accords. So-called because they were signed at Camp David, imaginatively enough, the US president's retreat. And this happened in September of 1978, and that was followed by a formal peace treaty being signed in 1979. And this was such a big deal that the leaders of both Egypt and Israel of the day both got awarded the Nobel Peace Prize that year. The eventual outcome of these talks was called the Framework for Peace in the Middle East, and had 3 constituent main parts. 1, a process for Palestinian self-government in the West Bank and Gaza, still an issue, even more so, as we know. The second point was a framework for the conclusion of a peace treaty between Egypt and Israel. And thirdly, a similar framework for peace treaties between Israel and its other neighbours, which frankly has never come to pass. That, in and of itself, though, is a bit of an oversimplification, though. There are many further details within each section. You could look at these and pick out exactly why it is Israel and not Egypt that has jeopardised these accords now, and why warfare between the two nations is suddenly being spoken about in the media again. For example, Under the first framework, the raising of Gaza and the increased attacks, land grabs, and settler activity in the West Bank, I think, are pretty flagrant violations of that agreement. Not that this would itself likely prompt Egypt into military action against Israel. They have been one of the leading peace negotiators in every failed attempt to secure a ceasefire between Israel and Gaza. Netanyahu wrecking these on every occasion as he has done so. A more pertinent violation to Egyptian security and sovereignty, though, is one that has persisted for the last year, and which was the subject of much negotiation in that latest round of peace talks, where Hamas agreed to allow Israel to remain in Gaza if they could just get to a ceasefire. Because the one sticking point on that was the Philadelphia corridor, which includes the Rafah border crossing, the border between Egypt and Gaza, as the Philadelphia corridor is. Israel wanted to stay there. Netanyahu wanted to keep the IDF in that corridor. Hamas said, no, you can stay elsewhere, but not there. And Egypt clearly wanted them out of there too, because their presence in the Philadelphia corridor is forbidden in the terms of the Camp David Accords. Those talks failed. Israel remains wherever it wants to be in Gaza, including still occupying and controlling the Philadelphia corridor and still maintaining control over the Rafah border crossing. You can imagine trust must be pretty rock bottom between Israel and Egypt at this point in time then, despite the peace negotiations evidently still ongoing. And so the fact Egypt have been increasing their military presence in the Sinai desert, the fear of Israel coming for them next, is perhaps not surprising. But equally, Israeli actions elsewhere might be prompting such a move as well. It's to Syria we have to turn next in this story then, because as we know, since the fall of the Assad regime, Israel has continued to seize more and more territory in southern Syria. It has taken a significant vantage point on the Syrian-Lebanese border. It has seized 30% of Syria's water sources. And because such water sources are shared territory in many cases due to the dry and arid conditions of much of the Middle East, by doing so, Israel also now control around 40% of Jordan's water sources. Significant leverage and all part of the Greater Israel Plan, which for many people is blatantly what Israel are carrying out right now in their views. The fact several Israeli politicians have espoused their dedication to widespread conquest of the Middle East to suit Israel's ongoing Greater Israel agenda hasn't helped either. And when we refer back to that image of the Greater Israel Plan, you can see that actually Egypt fit into these plans too, with Egypt expanding all the way west across the Sinai Desert, seizing control of the Suez Canal, and expanding all the way to the eastern bank of the River Nile before heading even further south. The crux of the matter here is that Egypt are being framed by Israeli media, and if any mainstream media outlets pick this story up, they will undoubtedly do the same, because we're used to them doing that, as being the ones at fault for making preparations in case Israel decide to invade them next. The fact anti-tank barriers are amongst the defences being put up in the Sinai show exactly who they fear will be coming for them next. Hamas don't have tanks after all. But all of this is Egypt exerting the right to defend itself. They are not violating the peace accords by doing what they are doing. They are not threatening Israel, but do feel threatened by Israel and are taking appropriate action. Diplomatically, it'll be a much harder sell for Israel's allies to make out that Egypt are the kind of threat associated with the various elements of the axis of resistance headed by Iran. Egypt have been the diplomats with good ties to the West themselves as well as the Middle East to try and sell them as being a threat to Israel in the same light as Hamas or Hezbollah is going to be one hell of an overreach. Even more eyes I would hope be open to the reality of the evil of the Israeli regime. And if placing defences can be used by Netanyahu as an excuse to invade Egypt next, any media spinning the line Israel has a right to defend itself as well as any politician saying it, well, they really ought to be writing their own obituaries to their own careers by doing so. This is a situation that will either settle on its own as a bit more grumbling and no more, as turned out before, or will escalate probably quite quickly, and if it does, really ought to have more people finally admitting that the Greater Israel Plan really is what is being pursued here, because given Egypt's role as mediators over the last year, you'd think they'd be the last target of Israel's Greater Israel designs. We'll have to keep an eye on this one. Meanwhile, what ought to perhaps be of more immediate concern to Israel is that third retaliation still being awaited by Iran, Operation True Promise 3 as it is called. It looks like this is going to be a far bigger operation than the previous two by the same name. Those retaliations Iran has already carried out in response to Israeli attacks on them. get all the details of that and the window of opportunity that is closing on Iran to respond in this video recommendation here as your suggested next watch. Please do also hit like, share and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already done so to help support the channel, and make sure you don't miss out on new daily content. I know you'd hate to miss it. All very much appreciated as that support is, and I will hopefully therefore catch you on the next vid. Cheers folks.